The Islamic faith, and of course, we're not accusing all Muslims of this, but this is permitted in their religious teachings, that they are allowed to lock arms with people that they have absolutely no ideological alliance with, people they consider inferior and immoral, such as the LGBTQ movement, trans ideology. All those people, perfectly happy to lock arms with them if it means destroying the current social structure, which is Christian Western civilization.
We don't advance the gospel through negligence. We advance the gospel by fighting evil everywhere, including political evil. We are allowing evil to overtake society. We're not being salt and light. Instead, we're cowering in the corner, claiming that we're just preaching the gospel, when in reality, we are not doing our job. We're congratulating ourselves on being winsome rather than actually being Christ-like.
What does radical Islam have to do with the LGBTQ movement, cultural Marxism, critical theory, the Democratic Party, and socialism? I know on the surface, these movements can look like very strange bedfellows because they have completely contradictory beliefs and even more contradictory goals. So why do they so often find themselves politically and culturally aligned? We're going to explain it all today, because if this seems confusing, that is because there is a war on reality that is manifesting in our culture as a full assault on objective truth. My guest today is Frank Turek and Phoenix Hayes. They are the authors of a brand new book called The War on Reality, Recovering Truth in a World That Celebrates Lies. We're going to talk about the ideas and alliances that are shaping our culture, why movements that seem to be having almost nothing in common are increasingly working together toward the same political goals, and what do Christians need to understand about the worldview that is underneath all of this. Now, I want to encourage you to get a copy of this book, The War on Reality. This is coming out very soon, but I really want to encourage my audience to pre-order this book. There are so many benefits when you pre-order a book. Number one, it signals Amazon, hey, we need to get more of these. Also, other booksellers, secular booksellers, are looking at Amazon pre-orders and thinking, wow, if a book is doing this well before it comes out, maybe we should stock it in our stores. So in that sense, you could even see it as evangelism. By pre-ordering this book, you might signal a retailer to bring it into to bring it before more people. So I really want to encourage you to do that. Today's conversation is going to be our goal to be correct, not politically correct. Before we get to that, I do want to mention our Israel trip. So many of you might remember a little over a year ago, we were talking about going to Israel, and many of you signed up to join us on the trip. But then, due to the unfolding events in the Middle East, we had to postpone the trip till next May. In fact, it will be on May 24th of 2027. And because we had to postpone it, some spots opened up. So I would like to invite you, if you want to go to Israel with my husband and I, and Mel Winstead, who is New Testament professor from Southern Evangelical Seminary, we'd love to have you join us. I'm going to put the link in the description because it's way too long to try to say on the air. But again, that's May 24th of 2027. If you've never been to Israel, or maybe you want to go again, this will be my first trip. I'm so excited, and I would love to have you join us for that. I also want to let you know you have just a few days left to get your copy of my book, Live Your Truth and Other Lies, on Kindle for just $3.99 through the end of August. That deal will be in place where you can pick that up for just $3.99. Now, I can't say exactly what it is, but there's another deal going to be happening the whole month of September on a different book, so be watching for that. And just a reminder, all Christian women, if you can get to Dallas October 10th for Share the Arrows, we'd love to see you there. You can go to sharethearrows.com, use my code Alisa15 for 15% off your registration. And with that, we'll go to Frank Turek and Phoenix Hayes. Phoenix and Frank, your book, The War on Reality, is coming out. It's called War on Reality, Recovering Truth in a World That Celebrates Lies. Very excited about this because I think my assessment of it is it's like apologetics that I got 10 years, 15 years ago, plus the application to a whole bunch of very important cultural things that are going on, like Islam, Marxism, LGBTQ. You guys are covering it all in this book. The algorithm, spiritual warfare. I mean, everything is in this book. And I think it's so comprehensive and so important. So first, Frank, we'll start with you. What led to you writing this book and co-writing it with Phoenix?
Well, Phoenix and I worked together in Cross-Examine for several years. And then we decided that there was a war on reality and we probably ought to start writing a book. And as Phoenix will say, it all started with the identity issue and the trans issue, but it just exploded beyond that because there's a war on not just gender and sexuality. There's a war on so many other fronts. So it exploded beyond that. And we were maybe halfway through it when Charlie Kirk was murdered. And so we said this book needs to be dedicated to Charlie because he was a warrior for reality in the war on reality. And so the first chapter is all about leading up to that day and what happened that day and after. And we all know that everybody at TPUSA, including myself, were somehow complicit in the murder, as everyone says. Yeah.
Don't implicate me. This is yours.
Yeah,
this is all you, Frank.
Yeah. It's just so crazy how people come up with the most outlandish theories without evidence. But the book really isn't about that, even though that is a war on reality. The book is really about so many of these topics that have come up over the past 10 years that literally are, if someone were to say this to you 20 or 30 years ago, that, excuse me, people would say that men can have babies and that math is racist and that logic and reason are tools of oppression. And if you have certain qualities, you're automatically an oppressor and you shouldn't be heard. If people were to say this 10, 15, 20 years ago, you go, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
So we decided that we would write a book, and it kept getting bigger because there's so many wars, so many battlefronts in the war on reality. And Phoenix, who the book is written in her voice, thankfully, because her voice is brilliant and funny. So it's very witty. It's a witty book, as you probably have seen, not because I added much to that, but she did. So I think it's not only covering a lot of topics, but it's an enjoyable read because as we journey to dystopia, we have to laugh.
That's right. And Phoenix, I've always commented on how you combine apologetics with comedy so well. In fact, the first time you came on the podcast, we talked about the memes that you were generating on your Instagram. So talk about the voice of this book and maybe some of the battles that you encountered. I know you guys had a major fight with the publisher over a fart joke. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was a hill we were prepared to die on, and we kept it. But, funnily enough, we were allowed to keep the joke, but I wasn't allowed to mention it in my acknowledgement to Frank. I wanted to be like, and thank you so much for finding a way to include a fat joke in the moral argument. Like, you are my hero. And they're like, please don't say that. We want people to take you seriously. I was like, yeah, if they've made it this far, I don't really care, but that's fine. Bonding over potty humor is wonderful. So sorry, I was so focused on fat joke. What did you ask me?
I asked about the fart joke. So that was
the
good.
fat joke.
That was right. Well, humor aside, I think that it's important to inject some humor into some of this stuff because you just have to laugh because it's so heavy. If you don't laugh, you're going to cry because if we look out into the world, there is so much confusion. Frank, you mentioned conspiracy theories, and I've done a lot of content on that, and others have. And, it's very sad to see that there are people who, even in the name of truth, are promoting wild theories that are not rooted in any kind of evidence or not rooted in reality. And it seems like people have these different realities that they're all living in. So I think that there has never been a more important time for this. And we're going to get into a lot of why this is the case. I want to definitely talk about the algorithm today, but I want to start with maybe the foundation of all of this. Where would you say the war of reality begins? Frank, we'll start with you. Where does the war on reality begin?
It started in the Garden of Eden, has God really said, and it's progressed from there. And in the modern age, it really got its biggest boost from postmodernism. the idea that there is no truth and everybody has their own fragmented reality. You have your truth, I have my truth, that whole thing. And of course, we point out how self-defeating that is. It's self-contradictory to say there's no truth. You simply ask them, is that true? Is it really true that there is no truth? And there's no such thing as your reality or my reality. There may be your perception or my perception of reality, but reality is what it is, regardless of what we perceive about it. So we have a section in the book called Reality Does Not Have Pronouns. And what we mean by that is there's not my gravity or your gravity. There's just gravity. There's not my math or your math. There's just math. There's not my law against murder and your law against murder isn't the same. No, if murder's wrong, it's wrong for me. It's wrong for you. It's wrong for everybody, right? It's not my reality or your reality. So we point all that out. And postmodernism is what really brought this on. And then Phoenix does a really good job in chapter 10 of pointing out the key to understanding why so many of the people in our culture are at war right now is something called cultural Marxism, oppressed oppressor. Maybe Phoenix can pick it up there.
Yeah, pick that up, Phoenix, because I do think that is underneath so much of this. Even when we talk about the phrase reality does not have pronouns, a lot of this can be traced back to what people are broadly calling wokeness or cultural Marxism. Can you talk a little bit about how that has really infected our culture?
Yeah, I can. But before, it's twofold. So for me, the moment that, okay, if truth is that which corresponds to reality, we know there's been a battle over truth since the Garden of Eden. But since postmodernism really started to gain popularity and everyone having their own version of truth, we could all survive that to a certain extent because it was still acknowledged that you can have your own truth, your own beliefs, but we're all stuck in the same reality. I would argue the tipping point was when the transgender ideologists said, no, my reality is now yours and you need to accommodate that. They crossed a line by stepping into my bathroom, by stepping into women's sports competitions, things like that. And it was the cultural Marxism that said, you know what, we need to let them. So it was like two strikes that created this ridiculous situation we now find ourselves in. If you keep telling everybody that their personal truth is valid and good and truth corresponds to reality, it was inevitable that someone would eventually push this into the public space and say, oh, okay, back that up. Let me walk into your bathroom. Let me whatever. And like I said, now that these people are viewed as being part of the oppressed class because they're perceived as suffering, because they have this very, very unfair, non-scientific diagnosis, which of course couldn't be a mental health issue because that wouldn't be loving or kind. It's an issue that they can't help. They're literally a male mind, soul. Again, we don't really acknowledge mind, soul in a naturalistic worldview, but for the sake of this argument, we'll pretend they're real. You've got a male mind, soul trapped against his will in a female body, and you're going to tell him he can't fix his body to accommodate and match what's going on with the mind. It's just cultural Marxism is what said, absolutely, we need to let you do that because who am I, a cisgender, again, a completely made up term, to oppress you and prevent you from enjoying the same freedoms that I have. So one of the greatest takeaways from the cultural Marxism chapter is you'll see it's rife with the contradictions of people with naturalistic worldviews who want to pretend that gender is distinctly separate from biology, and yet won't necessarily acknowledge an immaterial mind, certainly won't acknowledge a soul. But for the sake of this particular argument, we will keep those if it strengthens our position. But then when it comes to morality, you're seeing it's just like we just list dozens of them in the Marxism chapter.
Yeah, Frank, Phoenix just mentioned a few times the naturalistic worldview. Can you compare or maybe define what that is and then compare that to maybe a Christian worldview or a worldview that's rooted in reality? What's the difference between those things?
The naturalistic worldview says we're just molecules in motion. We're just completely controlled by the laws of physics. There is no soul. There's only a body. There is no mind. There's only a brain. You're just a molecular machine. You're just a moist robot.
No.
a meat puppet. See, like
No.
Phoenix and I go back and forth on that.
Phoenix hates when you say moist robot.
But that's of course what the atheists and the materialists say. Now, there's so many problems with that. Is how can you actually say that you are arriving at truth if you're completely driven by the laws of physics? Why should you even believe that thought? If you're a molecular machine, you can't reason, you can't debate. There is no right or wrong because you're just driven by the laws of physics. And so people are self-contradicting themselves when they say that all our thoughts come from the laws of physics. How do you even know that? Does that law come from the laws of physics too? Like, why would you even think it's true then? So it's a completely bankrupt worldview. Yet on the other hand, these same people will say, well, I have certain rights and these rights, they don't have any foundation for. Because if we are molecular machines, there's really no purpose or worth to life. So how are there any rights if there's no God? It's just your opinion against somebody else's opinion. Now, the Christian worldview, on the other hand, is a lot thicker than that very thin naturalistic worldview. We, of course, believe there's physics and material things, but we also realize there's immaterial things. There's the immaterial laws of logic. There's the immaterial laws of nature. I mean, the laws of nature aren't made of molecules. They govern molecules, but they're not made of molecules. There are the laws of morality. It's wrong to murder people. That law is not made of molecules. You're not going to find it in a drawer somewhere. Okay, so we have a much thicker worldview that can explain so much more of reality. We can explain why love exists. We can explain why people have rights. We can explain why people make moral decisions and therefore are morally accountable for them. Mm-hmm. Whereas the cultural Marxists can't and the materialists can't, yet they want to have those things as well. They want to say you're evil if you don't agree with us. They want to say they have certain rights, even though there's no right giver and there's no purpose to life and you're just a molecular machine. So it's a self-contradictory worldview, yet they're trying to say that their reality needs to be believed by everyone. And if you don't agree, we're going to hurt you. We're going to cancel you, or we're going to shoot you in the neck.
Summer is all about going somewhere, but fall is about coming home, back to school, back to routine, and back to gathering with the people you love. There's no better way to do this than bring everyone around the table with a meal made with quality ingredients. This is one of the reasons I love Good Ranchers, which is a Christian-owned American meat company where my better than organic chicken, my grass-fed beef, heritage breed pork gets delivered right to my door every single month on dry ice. And you guys, this month, I tried the new beef sticks. Oh my gosh. So I love beef sticks. I always have beef sticks in my carry-on when I fly because it's a good, quick, high-protein snack. But I have never had beef sticks like the ones that Good Ranchers makes. Have you ever bought them from the box store and they're dry and hard to chew? None of that with Good Ranchers. These are really tender. They're absolutely delicious, and they are now a permanent fixture in my home. You can try them also today by going to goodranchers.com and start your plan. And plus, you're going to get $50 off and free meat with every order when you use my code Alisa. Again, go to goodranchers.com, use my code Alisa. Exactly. And for me, it all comes down to purpose. If you have a naturalistic worldview, you can't meaningfully say that there is a moral purpose to anything that we do. And so therefore, your truth would be your truth and mine would be mine. And let's just fight it out and see who can win and rule the day. But if there is purpose, if there is a designer, if there is some kind of a God that created human beings with a purpose, then to your point, Phoenix, then it's kind of hypocritical to have your ideology undergirded by naturalism, but then borrow from a supernatural worldview that's purpose directed by saying there's a male soul or a female soul or something like that, borrowing from that when it's convenient. And I wouldn't say, and I think you might agree with this, that people aren't doing that intentionally. They're not saying, oh, well, I'm going to borrow from naturalism here and I'm going to borrow from a supernatural worldview over here. I think they're just confused about where they're getting their ideologies. And Phoenix, recently on Instagram, you posted a graphic that was really powerful. And I'd love for you to unpack it a little bit. And then I want to ask Frank to add to it. I've started to talk about Islam. I mean, we're all over the map. It seems like we're all over the map. We're talking about LGBTQ, cultural Marxism, Islam. but it's really all connected. And that's what I really want the people who are listening to us today to understand. When you don't have a consistent worldview, when you're not saying, okay, I'm a naturalist, so I'm going to stick with that. There can't be any sort of, moral imperatives. So therefore, let's fight it out. And my truth is my truth, be consistent. But, if you're going to be consistent as having a worldview that's rooted in the supernatural, be consistent with that. But people, I think, are just, they don't understand where all their ideologies are coming from. Therefore, that leaves them vulnerable to be used by people of other ideologies for their purposes. And this is what I think this graphic so beautifully showed. So what I'm going to describe it for the people, maybe we can put it on the screen for the video, but for those who are listening on audio, it's a graphic where you have this little small fish to the far right, and it says Democrats. Then there's a bigger fish that's got his mouth open to eat the smaller fish called DSA, Democratic Socialists. Is that correct? Yeah. And then the bigger fish behind that one, eating that one, is the communists. And then the largest fish that's behind all of it, that's going to eat all of them, is Islamists. Now, I'm sure that you probably got quite a bit of pushback on this because people aren't understanding the ideologies. And your caption said this is happening because people refuse to study history or to understand ideologies beyond cheap slogans. Don't be like those people. This isn't about ideological progression. It's about ideological capture from the inside. So, Phoenix, can you unpack, what are you talking about when you're saying like a Democrat is the small fish leading all the way back to Islam? What does Islam have to do with communism that has to do with Democrats?
Well, that's the point. It doesn't have anything to do with it. So many people saw this post and said, oh, this is the slippery slope fallacy. One does not lead to the other. That's right. They're not paying attention. One, they didn't read the caption. And two, look at the fish. It's not the Democrat leading into the DSA. The DSA is coming in behind. It's working on it's building upon the influence and work that the Democrat has already put in place and then using it to maximize their goals. And then we've got, so the Democrat is seemingly benign in this particular picture. They're looking for more liberal policies. They're looking for more tolerance, more handouts, more, however you want to look at it. That's what they're looking for. And they want to give more voices to the table, except potentially conservative Christian and Republicans. Then you've got DSA, who is all about that because it means they're allowed a seat at the table. They're allowed to talk about and really emphasize the economic inequalities and the injustices that they see. Of course, their solution to these injustices and these apparent inequalities are quite different from the Democrats. Then you've got communism coming in behind the democratic socialism. And just a quick correction, people who think democratic socialism is what's going on in Norway and Sweden are wrong. That is social democracy. Emphasis on democracy. Democratic socialism, emphasis on the socialism. Got it? So democratic socialism is just a few steps behind communism. It's more tame. It's more under control. No problem. The communists don't care. If you're going to do the hard work of moving the needle further toward a socialist society, that's great for them. They are ready to swoop in when they have sufficient power and influence. And then again, Islam, nothing to do with communism, nothing to do with the Democrat Party. That is not the direction the fish are going. But the Islamic faith, and of course, we're not accusing all Muslims of this, but this is permitted in their religious teachings, that they are allowed to lock arms with people that they have absolutely no ideological alliance with, people they consider inferior and immoral, such as the LGBTQ movement, trans ideology, pro-life, all those people perfectly happy to lock arms with them if it means destroying the current social structure, which is Christian Western civilization. So if they can break that down and weaken it, they will lock arms with anybody until they have sufficient power, then they will remove them. That's what they did in Iran in the 70s. That's what they will do here. It's what they're trying to do in Europe.
Frank, Phoenix just mentioned a whole lot of things that have to do with politics and not necessarily squarely about the gospel. And this is a Christian apologetics podcast. Why should we care, Frank, about politics as Christians? I mean, shouldn't we just preach the gospel when, of course, the Bible says that things are going to get worse. We're going to be persecuted. We're going to be hated. Shouldn't we just embrace that and not try to fight all these political battles? Why would you say this is important to talk about?
We have a whole chapter on it when pastors and other people say, oh, I don't get involved politically. I just preach the gospel. I ask them one question, or I say to them one thing. I say, I guess you don't think the gospel is very important then? And they go, well, what do you mean? I say, well, if you don't think that politics affects the gospel, you haven't been paying attention. You can go to some of the countries I've been to. I've been to Iran. There's no First Baptist Church of Tehran. I checked. I've been to Saudi Arabia. There's no Calvary Chapel of Mecca. I just got back not long ago from Egypt. If you want to start, say, Grace Church in Egypt, you're going to have trouble because politically, they don't want you there. Politics affects your ability to preach and live the gospel. And some of these megachurch pastors will say this, and I'll say, why don't you go try and start your megachurch over there in North Korea and see how far you get? You're not going to get anywhere because politically they've ruled it out. That's number one. Now, a caveat to that is people will say, well, but the church grows under persecution. Well, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, but we don't wish persecution on ourselves in order to advance the gospel. We don't advance the gospel through negligence. We advance the gospel by fighting evil everywhere, including political evil. Yes. Now, the second part to this is we're called to love our neighbors. And in the book, we have 10 reasons why Christians ought to be involved politically. I'm just giving you 2. The second reason is we're called to love our neighbor. And in order to love our neighbor, if we have the capacity to put laws in place that protect the gospel, religious freedom, and also protect them from evil, which is what the government is designed to do, God established government, and according to Romans 13, government is supposed to punish wrongdoers to protect innocent people from evil. If we put a government in place that doesn't punish wrongdoers, but actually punishes do-gooders, like the Biden administration punished pro-lifers and threw them in jail, then we're not doing our job. We are allowing evil to overtake society. We're not being salt and light. Instead, we're cowering in the corner, claiming that we're just preaching the gospel, when in reality, we are not doing our job. We're congratulating ourselves on being winsome rather than actually being Christ-like.
If there's one thing from this conversation that is so clear, is that it's hard for even adults to think critically in a world where so much information is being thrown at us all the time with the algorithm fine-tuned for rage. So that's why as Christian parents, we want to equip our kids to be able to navigate the thousands of truth claims that they are encountering every single week. Well, my favorite curriculum for young elementary kids is the biblical worldview curriculum from Foundation Worldview. They have a lot of great curriculums, from biblical sexuality to critical thinking to world religions. The biblical worldview curriculum in particular, though, solves the problem of all of these different truth claims, because it's going to train our little ones to explore basic questions like, what is truth? Who is God? How did life begin? What does it mean to be human? How can I tell right from wrong? I also love that this curriculum can be easily implemented in the home, church, or Christian school. I mentioned last time that I got a text from a local pastor here where they implemented it in their 11 a.m. service, and that service actually began to grow because parents were so hungry to be able to have their kids learn this information. But you can bring it into your own home by going to foundationworldview.com and use my code Alisa for 10% off any family, church, or Christian school license. Again, that's foundationworldview.com. Use my code Alisa. Man, preach. You in your chapter 1, Murder on Campus, Frank, you quoted Charlie. You said, like the Apostle Paul, Charlie knew he had many adversaries, but this is because he was an outspoken and he was effective. I think that is one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is how effective Charlie Kirk was at changing minds. He was out there in the belly of the beast on these college campuses, while some of us are over in our ivory towers, just saying, well, just keep it right to the gospel and let's just talk about the Trinity and biblical reliability. When you do have this big fish of radical Islam that is is trying to dominate the entire world. And as you mentioned, Frank, we as Christians, we need to be opposing evil wherever we find it. And just because something is labeled political doesn't mean we shouldn't call out evil where we see it in the political realm. And you quoted Charlie here, and this is how he put it. He said, the most important thing is always Jesus. The second most important thing is making sure we can talk about and worship Jesus. And frankly, I have to think that if I was a persecuted Christian in a nation where I was not free to openly attend church, where I was not allowed by law to own a Bible, I would sure hope that Christians in countries like America, where we are free to do those things, would be speaking out, would be advocating, would be doing all that they could to preserve a culture that allows for these kinds of things. And if that means through political means, then so be it. But Frank, I want you to comment more about that big fish of Islam. This is something that I have been very convicted about recently to start talking more and more about. Our friend Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy was on the last episode of the podcast talking about how when he was talking about radical Islam, he was doxxed, his family was threatened, they actually had to move. And this is something that really convicted me, like I need to be joining my voice with that. So Frank, can you talk about that big fish of Islam? Phoenix kind of set the table for us, showing how a lot of the things that we are unintentionally maybe accepting in our culture are kind of being motivated by this radical Islamic goal of dominating and subjugating the world. Can you talk a bit about that? How can it doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but how can radical Islam and LGBTQ be holding hands right now?
Well, the reason they're holding hands is because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And if you look at in chapter 10, the chapter on cultural Marxism we mentioned earlier, you'll see a chart on page 192. And once you see this chart, you'll realize the light bulb will come on and you go, oh, now I get it. Now I get why there is something known as gays for Gaza. Because the cultural Marxist worldview is they put people in two categories. You're either oppressed or you're an oppressor. Now, who are the oppressors? They're the white owning class men, heterosexual Christians who are able-bodied and citizens of America. Who are the oppressed? Anyone who is a people of color, poor, middle class, LGBTQ, non-Christians, disabled, or immigrants, or bonus points if you are an illegal immigrant. You're even more oppressed then. And so anybody that has the qualities of an oppressor is automatically considered somebody who should not be heard, and in some cases should be violently opposed. Violently opposed. Let me go through those characteristics again. White, owning class, men, heterosexuals, Christian, able-bodied citizens. Charlie Kirk met every one of those qualifications of an oppressor. Okay? And so this is why people can align with one another, particularly the LGBTQ people will align with the Muslims because they're both considered oppressed, despite the fact that Islam for 1,400 years has done nothing but oppress people. I mean, that's not Islamophobia, which is a bogus term. We talk about it in chapter 1 of the book because Charlie and I were talking about that 36 hours before he was murdered. Charlie rightfully pointed out that Islam is not a race, it's an ideology. And if it's an ideology, you might have good reason to be against it because Sharia law will take away all the freedoms that we experience here in America. It's actually incompatible with the United States Constitution. And who are the first people, going back to that fish idea, you got the Democrats here, and then you got all these bigger fishes eating them, ultimately Islam eating all of them. Who are the first people that are going to be executed if Islam takes over? The Democrats.
LGBTQ. Oh.
Yeah, the LGBTQ or anybody that aligns with them.
Yeah.
That's what happened, by the way, with the Shah of Iran when he was forced out by Jimmy Carter in 1979 and the Ayatollah came to power because Jimmy Carter greenlighted him. All the people that were trying to get rid of the Shah and bring in the Ayatollah, many of them were college students. And they had protested against the Shah. And so when the Shah was forced out and the Ayatollah came in, all the college students were going, yay, yay, yay. And what did the Ayatollah immediately do? He executed them because they were useful idiots for him. They got him into power and then he turned on them because they did not have the same worldview as the Ayatollah. And yet there are people out there today who are shouting gays for Gaza. If the gays went over to Gaza right now, they would be executed. Yeah. And sorry, this is just truth. And I don't know if we mentioned, I know your viewers are used to this, but I always have to tell crowds that we are going to be correct, not politically correct. This is just reality. If you don't like reality, don't shoot the messenger, okay? Charlie's already been shot, but that's really what's going on here. People want to shoot the messenger when we're just pointing this out, that people are not going to be judged on the content of their character, as Martin Luther King said. Now they're going to be judged on many of these qualities which have nothing to do with their behavior. Yeah. Like what their skin color is, how much money they have, whether they're men or women, whether they're citizens or Christians and yet this is how people are being judged, and we just need to expose it. And that's what we do in the War on Reality. And we also, by the way, give you things you can do to combat this in the War on Reality. It's a practical book as well.
And by the way, you can hear how heavy this stuff is. This is why there are fart jokes, to get you through, because this is heavy stuff. It's really serious. But two things I just wanted to add to what Frank said is, America is such a beautiful experiment of a country. It's still so young compared to these other nations. We talk about how Islam is incompatible with the U.S. Constitution, and yet they will take full advantage of the rights it grants them to weave its way in. The freedom, they come in on the Trojan horse of freedom of religion, but Islam is not merely a religion. It is a political system. It is a theocracy. Waiting in the wings is what they're all instructed to do. So those who say, well, all Muslims aren't like that. Correct. Not all Muslims are willing to be purely Quranically faithful to their own text. So, but that is what it is. And it will absolutely take full advantage of the freedoms that we grant them, in order to try and create their own law. And they are actively doing it now, where we have to have government officials come in and say, no, you cannot exercise Sharia law in this portion of the United States. It's just unbelievable. And then the second thing I wanted to add was cities like Dearborn, Michigan happened because Christians were told, just preach the gospel. I mean, it's one thing. Okay, let me phrase it this way. And this is a little bit of a depressing thought, but if you've read Revelation, you know it's true. The world is going to become more evil. We don't have to help it along. There is going to be a point where no matter what we do, we will not be able to stop it. It's already written. But we are going to be held accountable for what we didn't do when we could have done. Does that make sense? Yeah. So Christians living in Egypt right now, they can't do anything. They are oppressed. Their lives are at risk. I understand why they're not being politically active right now. Here in America, we are completely without excuse. You don't get to sit this one out because you know that eventually it's all going to go downhill anyway. You have to fight. You have to resist because there are still souls to be saved before that time comes.
Adele Natural Cosmetics is a Christian family-owned company based in Comfort, Texas. It was founded in 2014, and Adele creates makeup and skincare with carefully selected ingredients and a commitment to cleaner beauty. All of their products are formulated in the USA. They are proudly pro-life, and they support organizations that share a commitment to protecting and valuing life. I also love that this company believes that beauty should enhance what God has already created rather than mask it. They offer both skincare and makeup products designed to work together for really simple, natural beauty routine. I love so many of their products. I love their lip balms. Their tinted lip balms are very beautiful. The ballerina is just a nice soft pink. I love their blushes, and I love, currently my favorite, my holy grail product is their powder bronzer. It just gives you this beautiful warmth to your skin without looking like you've applied something to the surface of your skin. All of their products that I use just make me kind of look like I'm lit from within. I've talked about their highlighting stick. People have stopped me and said, what's that glow? And I'm like, it actually comes in a stick, and it's from Adele Natural Cosmetics. So you can give them a shot today by going to AdeleNaturalCosmetics.com. That's spelled ADEL, naturalcosmetics.com, and use my code Alisa for 25% off your first order. Again, that's AdeleNaturalCosmetics.com. Use my code Alisa.
Yeah, and that time may come. I don't know how. Nobody knows when.
Nobody
the
knows
end is gonna
when. Yeah.
come. It could be 100 years from now. It could be 1,000 years. We don't know. We have no
Right.
idea.
Right.
Jesus said nobody knows the day, the hour, the times, nor the season. And so we're just called to be faithful and leave the results to God. And too often we don't do that. We think, oh, we're just polishing the brass rails of a sinking ship. Why bother? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I have kids and grandkids, and I want them to have freedoms. I want to continue to have the freedom to preach and live the gospel, and I want people protected from evil.
Yeah.
And yet, if we don't do anything, I mean, who else is going to protect people?
That's right.
Are the atheists going to do it? Are the Muslims going to do it? No.
Right. And, I often think what a lot of Christians don't understand, because maybe they know a nice Muslim family. And I'm glad that there are peaceful Muslims. I'm glad that there are westernized kind of progressive Muslims. That's one thing I talked about last week with Michael Jones is like, actually, I fight against progressive Christianity, but I actually want the Muslims to be progressive. I want them to not be, obeying their teachings. But the point that I think a lot of Christians don't realize is that when Christians spread by the sword, when Christians commit bloodshed, when Christians oppress, they are directly disobeying their scripture. When Muslims do it, they are obeying. And that's what I don't think people realize. They'll be like, oh, well, Christians have been violent, but there's peaceful Muslims. But you have to go back to the actual teachings. And a consistent Muslim that is obeying the Quran, that is, considering the authentic hadith, they are going to be inflicting jihad. This is something that is the end goal. And here's a question for you guys that kind of puzzles me. But in the worldview of Marxism, cultural Marxism that we're seeing broadly called wokeness, the number one oppressor seems to be Christian. It's Christianity is really the number one oppressor.
That's their enemy. That's their enemy.
It's the number one enemy. When at the same time, Christians are globally the most persecuted religion. So I can't make sense of that. Can you make sense of that? Why is that?
I would say it's totally demonic. It's just like, why are Jews some of the most persecuted people throughout history? There's only 16 million Jews in the whole world. In the whole world. I mean, New York City has more people than there are Jews in the entire world. And yet they're uniquely
behind everything.
Singled out. Yeah, like they're if they're controlling everything, why are they always persecuted?
Yeah.
Right? How does that work? If they're in control of everything, you think they'd be able to control their own persecution.
Yeah. But I can add to that, the reason why Marxism views white Christians as the most oppressed is because it pretends to be a worldview, a universal worldview to looking at the whole globe. It's not. It's one born out of Europe and then spread across to the Americas through the college campuses. It's a primarily privileged, academia-based, philosophical idea system bred from people in ivory towers, not people who held down real jobs and had to actually suffer and earn what they were given. So with this myopic lens filled with privilege, it claims to be able to make these judgments about all humanity, and yet it actually only applies it to Western civilization. And the problem is, yeah, sure, there's the demonic aspect, but it doesn't matter that Christians are being persecuted in Africa or the Middle East. It doesn't matter. The only thing they care about is that here in America, they aren't, and they have power. And Marxism hates power because it doesn't have it. And so it's a perpetual cycle of, that's not fair, I want it. Once they have it, then what? You've got to repeat the cycle. So that's why we talk about, it's just a perpetual cycle of conflict and rage with no resolution.
Yeah, the oppressed oppressor sort of cultural Marxism motif in chapter 10. By the way, people can get chapter 10 right now if they pre-order the book. If they go to the waronreality.com after pre-ordering the book on Amazon or wherever, they put their receipt in there. We're going to send them chapter 10 for free. And once they see that chart on page 192, they'll go, oh, I got it now. Now I see why all this is happening. This is the worldview of the left that's trying to impose itself on everyone. And one, by the way, also that Erica Kirk wrote the foreword for this, and they can see the foreword for it on the waronreality.com. And she makes an amazing point in there. She is incredibly sharp. She says, I'm paraphrasing, but she says this, she says that on 9/10/2025, my reality here in this life changed forever. And she said, I'm going to be struggling with that for the rest of my life. She said, but what brings me peace is not denying or opposing reality, but surrendering to it.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
And
Goosebumps.
that ultimately is all of our problems. Whenever we rebel against reality, we not only hurt ourselves, but we hurt others. And so she is very insightful, as you know, and all these crazy theories about her being involved in the murder of her husband are demonic because there's no truth to them. There's no evidence for. In fact, you and I, Alisa, were talking before the show, and you pointed out these people who believe this stuff never consider, what if they're wrong?
Yeah.
What if they're wrong? They are slandering a widow.
And abusing and, tormenting a widow. That is, it's so insidious. It's so insidious.
Can I say one other thing about socialism? Because this is important. I always ask people this question: why is no one getting on rickety boats in Florida to flee to Cuba? Why is nobody doing that? Why are there no caravans going from the United States to Venezuela? Why are they all in the opposite direction? Because socialism never has worked, never can work, because it misunderstands human nature. Socialism thinks that people are going to work as much as they can and take as little as they need. In reality, people are going to work as little as they can and take as much as they want if they are given that opportunity. You need to incentivize people to work. If you do not incentivize people to work, you're not going to have prosperity. The default position is not prosperity. Socialism thinks that the default position is prosperity and people are being denied it. No, the default position in life has always been poverty. You have to work to get prosperity. Poverty just happens. Poverty is the default, but yet people think somehow they deserve prosperity. And since, say, Jeff Bezos has prosperity, they're somehow been robbed of prosperity by Jeff Bezos, the founder and owner of Amazon. No, Jeff Bezos has produced more jobs and more livelihoods for people than almost anybody else in the world. And he deserves every dollar he gets because of what he's done. He's brought more people out of poverty. And yet people look at people like that and Elon Musk and they go, oh, they're evil. They're stealing from me. No, they're providing opportunity for you. Wake up.
Yeah.
It also operates on the baseline assumption that people are good. If people are good, the only reason people are bad is because someone else who was also good made them bad. It's again, another contradiction. But Alisa, this is why chapter 1 we first wrote together was the one on identity. Because as we said, we thought this book was mostly going to be about identity. When we shift gears and realize, no, this is a full front attack on reality on so many levels, we realized we need to go back to the beginning. So the identity chapter, of course, is in here, but it's halfway through. I think it starts around page 160. The first 150 pages are covering the baseline for what we mean by reality. How do we know what's real? Where are we getting these assumptions about morality, human value, human dignity, human sexuality, the way family ought to operate, the way marriage was designed? All these issues needed to be covered in as concise a way as possible, in as manageable a way as possible, because of course books and books and books have been written on each of those topics before we could then start dissecting identity, Marxism, family, marriage, information, politics, because we're not just coming up with these opinions out of a bubble. They're grounded in truth and the source of all truth.
Yeah, very good. I want to talk about information because this is something that I see very often, even in my personal life. I'll get texts from people who I think, they're growing in their faith, they're growing in the grace and knowledge of Jesus. And then they'll send me this video like, what do you think about this? And it's kind of puzzling because I'm thinking, this one isn't that hard to discern. Like, it's not that difficult. I get it if something's kind of like, oh, what about this claim that the Bible's been corrupted? Like, I get something like that. But some of the things people are sending me, I'm just going, there are some wires getting crossed with information. And I'm wondering if the algorithms are not just driving absolutely everybody crazy. Can you comment on information and how we receive information today? Because it seems like people have no idea how to ask a question, evaluate the evidence, come to a conclusion with humility. Always want to keep our hands open in case we're wrong about something, if some new evidence comes to light or something like that. But especially in light of this whole Candace Owens phenomenon, it seems like people are completely unable to just, and I don't say this arrogantly, because I've shared on past podcasts how I fell for one of these conspiracy theories, whenever this was 15 years ago or something, because I was really wanting to pursue truth, and it seemed like something weird was going on. And I didn't feel like I was getting the whole story. But back then, I didn't see anybody like Candace coming along saying, hey, now I'm going to give language to all those red flags you see. Here's what's really going on. Here's the secret knowledge that you have not had access to. You've only had access to what they want you to know. Now we're going to give you the real story. I didn't even have anything like that. But again, to your point earlier, Frank, the question I did ask was, what if I'm wrong? And people could be very hurt by promoting this without, I knew at least enough to know back then that I didn't have solid evidence. It just seemed like something was kind of weird. But I guess all of that to say, what role does the algorithm and all of this information that is coming through our screens play in these great deceptions? Like even that fish, graphic is so helpful. Like, what's at play and why are people so confused?
Let me point out that in the book, we explained some tactics of deception. Linguistic theft is one of them, and I want Phoenix to explain that, but I'll explain another one that we have in the book. We don't teach logic anymore in public school, Alisa. Instead of teaching kids how to think, we're teaching them what to feel.
Yeah.
And that can be dangerous, because if you trust your feelings or follow your feelings without reason or moral restraint, you're going to wind up in a very dark and false place. Let me give you just one logical fallacy that I think drives so much of the rage, sometimes on both sides of the aisle. And it's something called a hasty generalization. What's a hasty generalization? It's when you get one piece of data and you generalize that data to the entire population. This happened last winter with regard to ICE. People saw these short videos where ICE was confronting people and violence even took place, and they thought, oh, ICE, everybody in ICE is a murderer, and we got to defund the police and abolish ICE and all this. That's known as a hasty generalization. What was really going on is people like Governor Walz and Mayor Fry there in Minneapolis were letting violent criminals out of jail instead of handing them to ICE, where there would have been no confrontation. Mm-hmm. So then ICE would have to go into these neighborhoods and confront these people. And sometimes, obviously, there was a struggle. And then people would see these 15-second videos and then generalize it to the entire ICE population or the police. When I was growing up, we used to call this prejudice, that you have not enough information, but you apply it to the entire group. In order to do that rightly, to apply something to the entire group, you would need good survey data, or you would need to know everything that was going on. And that's not what happens here. Let me give you an example from the other side of the aisle. There's been several shootings related to by people involved in transgender relationships or transgender themselves. Charlie was one of them. Yep. This guy was involved in a trans relationship. Annunciation School, a couple of months before Charlie was murdered in Minneapolis, trans shooting in Nashville a couple of years ago, where you live, trans shooting in Canada not long ago as well. There seems to be too many trans shootings. Would any of us be justified in saying, therefore, that all trans people are violent? No. Right. But if you do look at the data, trans people are more violent than other groups. However, it's still a small minority of trans people. You can't base you can't make a hasty generalization from anecdotal data to entire groups. But that is what the left does in particular. Sometimes the right do it as well because of the algorithm. They're just seeing the same thing over and over again. But that's precisely what cultural Marxism does. It says if you have certain qualities, whether your race, your gender, your sexual preference, whether you're a citizen or not, you're automatically considered evil. And if you're on the other side, you're automatically considered good. That is a huge problem that the book, The War on Reality, exposes.
To add on to that hasty generalization tactic, another way of looking at it is a tactic called muddying the waters. Now, I saw this all the time when Charlie was murdered, and then clips started circulating about him to highlight what a bigoted, awful person he was. One person in particular sent me a clip from a famous footballer who I can't remember the name because I don't follow football, but he started his video, and I don't know if this was intentional. I'm going to assume it's not, because I think people just don't question anything. The first clip of this series of clips of out of context snapshots of Charlie, where he was framed in the worst possible light, the very first one has him shouting a racial slur at a political opponent. Cenk, what's his first name? Cenk.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Anyway,
I don't know his name, but that is his last name. Yeah.
That's his last name. Of course, people said, oh, he's yelling chink at an Asian in the audience, a racial slur at someone in the audience. He's not. He's using a man's last name or first name, I forget. Using that clip then set the tone for how you were going to interpret every other clip that followed, so that it muddied the water, so that, okay, well, this is established right out the gate that Charlie is racist. He has no qualms against, using slurs against people publicly and openly on a stage even. Now think about that and reinterpret every other clip that follows.
Yeah. That's sometimes called muddying the waters, or also poisoning the well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
It's a logical fallacy. And since we don't teach logical fallacies anymore, people just take this stuff hook, line, and sinker. And then they go into a rage.
Yeah. Well, and then they double down, triple down, quadruple down, because I remember when that happened, and there were several videos showing, hey, actually, this is this guy's name. He wasn't shouting a racial slur. Okay, glad we cleared that up. No, people doubled down. Well, maybe that's his name, but he was also doing. It's like they refused to accept what is the most logical explanation. And Frankie, you said something earlier about how we're not teaching critical thinking to kids in schools, but we're teaching other things. And one of, it's a very interesting phenomenon that my husband has been watching body cam footage of police with my son, just to kind of show him, like, this is what happens when somebody spirals out or crashes out in public with a cop. Like, you just can't be doing that. But they've been just kind of watching some of these things. And so I catch it here and there. And it's been astonishing to me how many young people are so defiant with cops. The cops are all but getting them a hotel room and, a glass of water. It's like just bending over backwards, trying to get them to comply. And the person just keeps accelerating and going out of control, to where finally the officers have to restrain the person, and they're doing it as gently as they can. But the point that is so fascinating to me is it's very clear, especially among the younger generation, it's not like they're walking by cops going like, oh, I'm kind of nervous. I better watch my P's and Q's, like I would have thought when I was younger. They're openly defiant. They're egging the cops on. And it occurred to me, this is, again, now we're going to connect another fish, which is how this is getting in the schools, which is social emotional learning. We're not teaching the kids critical thinking. We're actually teaching them that the most important thing is that you feel safe and that you feel mentally well in any given moment. So if that means that it's going to harm your mental health to take this math test today, then you can go to a safe room or something like that. I mean, that's like what's going on in that world. So then you fast forward to reality, when they're actually in an altercation with a police officer. All they've been taught their whole life is that the most important thing a person can do is make me feel safe and make sure that I feel, good mentally. Well, in that moment, they're meeting reality. The cop's job is not to make you feel safe. And that's why they're spiraling out of control, I think, because they're going, wait, what? They're so confused that these police officers are not just accommodating their needs in that moment. And it's like we're teaching kids one thing, but then they face the harsh reality of the way the world actually is, and they have no tools that they've been given to be able to even navigate actual reality.
Yeah,
which,
we are creating snowflakes, and then we wonder why they melt when it gets hot.
Yeah, exactly. That's very well put, actually. Well, as we close out here, guys, there's so much more we could have gotten into. You talk about things like Israel. You talk about politics and law. I want to just get a couple minutes from each of you, final takeaways for our audience. Of course, we want everybody to get the book, and we'll let everybody know how to get that. But just some final advice for Christians who might be I guarantee you there's people who are hearing all of this and they're feeling overwhelmed. They're like, there's Islam, there's Marxism, there's LGBTQ. Oh my gosh, there's so many things that are raging war on reality. What's your advice to Christians as they're learning about this and taking all this information in? Frank, we'll start with you.
Well, there are answers to this, and the book has some very practical answers to it. There's also a workbook people can get with it if they want to go in a small group with somebody, or you just study on their own. So the beauty, of course, of all this is that Jesus is the source of reality. And he says, of course, you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free. The implication of that statement is if you don't have the truth or you're denying the truth, you're in bondage. You're in bondage to these contradictory worldviews that make people miserable and put them in rage, rather than the peace that you get from being at peace with God and one another. So there is a solution to all this. And God has put us, according to Acts chapter 17, when Paul is talking to the Athenians in Mars Hill, he says, God has put us in this place at this time for a reason. Everybody listening, watching us right now is living at a time and a place where God wants you to live, so you can be an ambassador for him and have what Aquinas called the dignity of causality, that everything you do every day matters for a time and eternity. God could do all this himself, right? He could inform everybody of the truth, but he has entrusted that to us. And so we're on this great adventure where we are actually involved in not only building God's kingdom here, but into eternity. And one of the ways we do that is we demolish arguments, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 10, and we take every thought captive to Christ. That's what the War on Reality, the book, is trying to do. It's trying to demolish arguments and take every thought captive to Christ, and giving people a lifeline out of some of the bad ideas that they've just imbibed in the culture. So that's what it's for. It's very practical. We even, let's show how practical it is. We even have a section in here on what questions you should ask your kid if he comes to you and says, Mom, Dad, I'm trans. Like, it's that level of practicality. I was just in St. Louis yesterday, and someone came up to the book table and showed me a series of questions that I had presented years before. And here's questions you ought to ask your HR boss if they trying to impose DEI on you. And he said he brought those questions the very next day into a meeting where he was about to be accused of not being on board with DEI. He asked all those questions and they couldn't answer them, and the whole thing got diffused.
Wow.
So sometimes it's just asking the right questions. So the book will give you the right questions to ask.
Yeah. There's no question that the second half of the book addresses some very heavy topics. It is a war, but ultimately you don't need to worry about all the different battlefronts. Don't feel overwhelmed by it. I mean, if God's called you to a focus on one particular aspect, thank goodness we need you. You can't, don't abdicate that responsibility. But ultimately we did finish on a chapter called The Ultimate Reality. They're just refocusing what the Christian life is meant to be, what this all boils down to, the source of all truth, the one that sustains everything, the one who is not surprised by any of this, and the one to whom we will eventually return home to. He is our everlasting hope and comforter. And that's why, again, Christianity not only grounds us in what truly is real, but it grounds us in just an eternal hope. It's a good story. So yes, be equipped so you know how to address these issues. Don't stay silent, but remember that this isn't home, and that's a good thing.
Well, I want to thank my guests, Frank Turek and Phoenix Hayes. Get their book, The War on Reality, Recovering Truth in a World That Celebrates Lies. And let's remember, as we pursue Christ, to keep a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a thick skin.
So pray for me and I will pray for you. No turning right or left, we'll make it through. The road that's narrow and the gate that's small. Don't give up, it's gonna be